So we're going to move on to the third and the final experiment. This is actually one of the most famous and important in behavioral science. In fact, in many ways, it's what put the discipline on the map. It was used in the identification of a phenomenon that became known as mental accounting. In fact, I think, if I'm correct, Owen, it actually helped its creators to win a Nobel Prize. So there's obviously something in it. Here's the question, and we'd like all of you to answer this on your phone. So if you hit poll EV, again, same thing as before. It's not a trick question, and we really want your kind of first instinctive answer. You've just received a small tax refund from the IRS. And when I say small, I mean small. $100 doesn't have to be a large amount of money. But the key thing is you weren't expecting this. So we would like to know, what does your fast thinking system say to you would like to do with the money? Those are your choices. Get your phones out, use poll EV. And whilst you're not thinking about it too hard, we're going to hear a little bit more from our players.
I don't have an entertainment or a lottery pot. It's really just kind of whatever cash I have on me at the moment. And I don't think I've ever spent more than $5 at one time. And then, but it is funny because then when I do win, say like $2 on a scratch off, I'll save that to then go buy more. So that's also part of my budget.
So I don't really have a budget for the lottery. What I'll typically do is I'll just set myself to only buy one ticket. And if I end up winning that ticket, then usually it ends up being a free win, free play. So then I'll just end up keep going that way. But yeah, aside from that, I don't really have a budget.
So they have little kiosks at the corner store here, the grocery store, like 7-Eleven, that kind of thing. And so I don't go there just to buy the tickets specifically. It's usually like, oh, I'm getting some groceries, getting some snacks, something like that. And then I'm like, oh yeah, like I have some extra cash. I have an extra 20, I have extra $30, something like that. And yeah, but I don't go specifically to buy the tickets. I would say with the pandemic, I've learned the importance of having a safety net. So pre-pandemic would be like, oh, I'm going to spend this on something fun, treat myself. Now with the smaller one, I might either invest it towards something I need or just put it in a savings account, something like that. Now with the mega prize, like the millions and millions, I definitely would need help. I know this is like boring, but I'd probably get a financial advisor and I would, you know, be smart about it. But I definitely would travel, like once things like open up more for traveling, I would like to travel around the world, not just the United States. I would like to, you know, invest in a place like a house, something like that.
Yo sigo gastando lo mismo que gastaba antes en la lotería, no he gastado diferente porque siempre compro de 1 a 3 boletos a la semana. Entonces depende. Si yo ganara la lotería, yo creo que pagaría primero mis deudas, compraría una casa para mí y para mis papás. También necesito un cambio de carro, entonces compraría un carro, viajaría mucho. Y también destinaría una parte de inversión y otra parte para la beneficencia o para alguna fundación que pueda ayudar a alguien más. Después de la pandemia, porque en la pandemia me di cuenta que hay mucha gente que necesita ayuda, que le está pasando muy mal, que pues simplemente que la pandemia destrozó muchas cosas. Entonces, creo que sí cambia mi decisión de ayudar a la gente después de lo que hemos vivido y visto en la pandemia.
Por lo mismo, me gustaría invertir en propiedades, comprar apartamentos, pisos, edificios, ese tipo de cosas. Antes de la pandemia, habría dicho, quiero conocer el mundo, quiero viajar, todo eso. pero la pandemia me hizo darme cuenta de muchas cosas, que es necesario cuidar lo que uno tiene para después poder hacer las mismas cosas con seguridad.
Yo muy seguramente lo que haga sería comprarme una casa o un departamento. Este siempre fue mi objetivo en la vida, antes de la pandemia, y muy seguramente lo siga haciendo de acá a muchos años en adelante.
Honestly, we really could have just done another hour of people's thoughts on their money, what they spend on lottery, where that comes from, and then what they would do with the winnings. But the poll's closed now, so we're gonna see your responses in a moment. Before we get there, though, Owain, talk to us about mental accounting. What was the origin of this experiment, and what were the principles that it revealed?
So you're right. So this set of findings helped Richard Thaler, who's the co-author of the book, Nudge to win the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. And he did it when he was looking at a number of principles that economists were typically using to inform a wider set of models. And there was basically an assumption that was underpinning a lot of models that economists would typically be using, that suggested that that most people treat a pound or a dollar as a pound or a dollar, regardless of where it comes from or what account they put it into. But what he found in looking at how people actually think about money and how they spend money is that it matters a lot where that money comes from. So we put a psychological wrapper, if you like, around money that we have or money that we receive, and that directly influences how we spend the money and how we treat it. So it's one of the phenomena that explains why, for example, many people have both a savings account as well as a credit card debt. You'd think as an economist or somebody who is thinking about what a rational financial decision might be, that you use your savings account to pay off your credit card debt. But many people are very comfortable with the idea that you have some savings, but you also use your credit card, and those two things can very easily, within our minds, go together. And we saw that with the players' interviews. People allocate a budget for what they're going to spend on activities like playing the lottery. So we saw that with some of the players. They were mentally accounting for their expenditure that month. Typically, people have a kind of a budget, whether or not they really think about it as a budget for fun related activities through the month. That guides their decision making. But we also saw it in very clearly, I think, through that second area, namely that when people win money through a lottery, they treat it very differently from how you might think about money that you've earned or money that you've inherited. And you find that again through lots of experiments in the behavioral science field, namely that if you ask people how they might spend money, their answers depend a lot on where that money is coming from.
Okay, so we're going to speed through this, but I'm going to see if we've got time to get Michelle back, because I'm really interested to see how she would have behaved with this fictional tax refund. Hi, Michelle. Last one,
Charles.
okay.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks again for being such a great sport. So we asked the audience this question about receiving a tax refund. So let's just imagine that you get a letter from the IRC, your tax authority, and it says, Michelle, last year you overpaid us by $100. So here's a check for $100. How do you feel in that situation?
Happy.
So the IRS has taken money from you from the previous year and is now giving you that money back, but you feel happy about it. But why do you feel so delighted?
Because I didn't expect that. I would have not have known that I overpaid unless they sent the letter. I didn't expect to get a check in the mail that day, so I'd be thrilled.
So you almost treat it as a windfall in the same way as some of our players were thinking about what they would do with the winnings if they were to win on the lottery. So one of the interesting things about this is, like, imagine a slightly different scenario now. So the tax authority in the first scenario is giving you a tax refund, but now imagine that last year you underpaid your tax and you get a similar looking letter at first, but instead of telling you that you've got a check for $100, they're saying you now owe us $100. How do you feel? How do you feel now?
No, I'm not happy.
You're not happy. Why are you not happy?
Similarly, I didn't expect that, and so now I have to write a check to them that I wasn't expecting to do that month. So that might have been money I wanted to spend on something else.
Right. And I think the really interesting thing, so I would have responded exactly the same as you, Michelle. But the really interesting thing, and this kind of takes us back to the literature around mental accounting, is that in pure financial terms, these two situations are exactly the same. Your net position is exactly the same. Okay? In one situation, you overpaid and the tax authority is having to sort that out. And in the other situation, the reverse is the case. But your net position is the same in both those scenarios. But psychologically, they're poles apart.
Yes.
And that's why this is kind of an interesting phenomenon from a behavioural science perspective, is that financially they look the same to an economist looking at things very rationally. In some ways they're the same, but psychologically they're completely different scenarios. And that explains why it influences what we actually do with our money. So you end up, if you get a windfall, spending that money, maybe buying something that you wouldn't have otherwise bought. Whereas in the other scenario, where you're told, well, you know, that's $100, you're scrabbling around thinking, where am I going to find this money from? Maybe I need to take it from my savings.
Okay.
I think my economics professor would like me to brush off my books now.
No, you're just functioning as a normal human being, I think.
And I think your economics professor would probably have responded in exactly the same way if
I hope so.
he or she was being honest with themselves.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been great to have you today. I think now we ought to have a quick look at actually what you all in the audience would have done with your free money that was actually yours in the first place. Ooh. So there you go. 46%, nearly half of you would have saved it for a rainy day. What great, outstanding and responsible citizens you are. It's very interesting, actually, because Noelle, I want to turn to you on this point, because I think you found some interesting statistics coming out of the research about how people's attitudes to money may have changed in the pandemic. And I think this could have some really interesting medium-term implications for lottery purchasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both the video and the poll just showed us that there are a fair amount of people who, coming out of the pandemic, sort of recognize the responsibilities of money. And there's something that we're looking at called financial wellness, right? How do we handle money in our lives? So if we could just go to slide number 10, I've got a couple statistics about how people are really approaching finances and money today. The interesting thing that we're finding, and I'm talking now more about overall financial well-being, not that sort of windfall that Owain was using as an example, that people are being more cautious about where they're spending. They're still spending. That's the key. They're still spending, but now they're looking to really budget that money and really think about, where am I applying it towards? And so that also goes with lottery. They are still spending on lottery, but whereas before they might have just gone, opened their wallet, bought a ticket, now they're consciously sort of thinking about, how much do I typically spend? I'm going to put that money aside because this is part of my Saturday morning routine that makes me really happy. And thinking about, so 44% global consumers are expecting to kind of continue this behavior. We have a whole kind of tribe and segment that we're looking at called the budgeteers, of people who are being really cautious with their money. This is particular with Gen X and millennials who got hit hardest. So the pandemic, people, some people lost their jobs because of the pandemic, or companies closed down. That generation, those two generations got really hit really hard because they had to tap into their nest eggs. So this is a behavior that we expect. And again, I don't think it's going to impact. I don't think it's going to impact how much people buy lottery tickets. I think that will stay the same, but there will be a conscious consideration of that. And that kind of goes into the next trend of people being cautious. I thought this stat was really interesting because when we put our survey out in March, we actually thought the number of people who wanted to be more adventurous would tick down because of the pandemic, and those people who were more cautious would tick up, and actually the reverse happened. So 31% of global consumers want to be even more adventurous coming out of the pandemic. This is about, I think, a 3 or 4% increase, depending on which part of the country you're looking at, versus, again, those being sort of more conservative, which ticked down. So it's kind of really interesting that even though people want to be more adventurous, they're sort of kind of mindfully, if you think about mindfully planning or thinking about how they're spending money and where they're spending money at.
I think that's just completely fascinating. It doesn't surprise me at all that there's a change. But I mean, we had a question from the audience actually about whether this concept of mental accounting means that we should be looking at prize structures. So let me ask the question. I mean, given that people are being more cautious, let's say value conscious in their spending decisions, and let's assume that there's a mental budget for lottery play that sits up here somewhere. Owen, talk us through the mechanic of what's going on in somebody's mind when they've won a small prize. So they in fact we heard it from one of the guys in the video actually, who said that whenever he won a small prize, he was just going to basically go and do a rebuy. So what's going on there? Why is he not just depleting his budget and that's it?
So I think it's a really good illustration of this concept, because what's effectively happening here is that that individual player, and I think the trend data that Noelle just shared with us, suggests that people will have a mental account for their lottery playing, but if you get a small reward, it's very similar to what we were just discussing with Michelle and through the poll in terms of the feeling that you might get from a tax rebate. You'd see it as a windfall that you might not have otherwise had, but you see it within that particular context of playing the lottery. So it gets added to your lottery playing budget rather than treated as being a completely different source of income. So if that same amount of money had come from a different source, so the savings pot in the individual's house, it would have been treated very, very differently.
Oh, that's fascinating. And Noelle, let's talk about the prizes. We heard something that we heard from the players on the Vox Pops was that they were thinking differently about how they would spend the big jackpot, right? The super prize, which clearly still motivates people a lot, but the way that they spend it differently. Do you think that this means that lotteries need to be more conscious about how they communicate the value, or they try to connect with people over the big prizes?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a real opportunity here to communicate with people sort of on the returns on their investment, whether it's a small prize or a large prize, right? Joy has a lot of meaning to a lot of people, and having fun has a lot of meaning to a lot of people. In that idea of responsible investment, I know I found it really interesting that quite a few were talking about wanting to help others or to give back. And again, that's kind of touches base with the local community that we talked about. We also see altruism on the rise. So while there's still always going to be that need of, I think the one woman from Mexico was talking about taking care of herself in terms of her bills, taking care of her parents and building a home, and then taking care of others and giving back to the community. And I just found that really fascinating that people's minds are kind of shifting from just all about me. I'm keeping my eyes very closely on influencers to see how this changes and evolves, to really starting to think about others. Again, my family ties were very much strengthened. So to answer your question, I think that idea of jackpot is people really thinking about investing in different places as opposed to just in spending it all in one place.
One really interesting point.
I'm going to have to stop you, I'm afraid. And honestly, I mean, we really could be talking about this for hours, but we're out of time. I'm afraid the gods of time are against us. It's been tremendous. I just really want to share quickly some of the takeaways from this last section on mental accounting that we managed to touch on. But it's clearly a really, really important topic, and a phenomenon that has real salience when it comes to people's lottery purchasing budgets and what they would do with the winnings. So is there a shift towards people becoming cautious consumers? And what does that mean in terms of where they see the lottery budgets in their minds and in relation to all the other spend? And how can you as a lottery protect that and encourage that? What does it mean? What does all this mean for the way that people view a lottery win? If we're out selling a dream of world travel and actually people are thinking about how can I help my local community, maybe there's a risk of not connecting with them in the same way. And we know that the power of lottery is its relevance to people, particularly with the good causes, and what they can do with the money. And both of those things are important and have been disrupted by the pandemic. And the last thing is, and I think I'm sorry to have cut Owain off, but I'm sure we were about to get back into this, which is there seems to be some potentially significant implications for prize structuring for coming out of mental accounting. Well, particularly, what do you do with the prizes in the middle that don't quite fit into the rebuy category, but they aren't quite life-changing either? And there's some very interesting stuff there, and I imagine there's going to be a lot of experiments coming out of it. But as I said, I'm afraid we're all out of time.